Welcome to Land of Horror, where horror stories come to life like never before. In today's video, we will explore chilling true events, unsolved mysteries, and the fears lurking in the shadows. From bone-chilling murder cases to supernatural phenomena that defy all explanation, each story will take you on a journey filled with tension and suspense. You will hear about real individuals who have faced terrifying moments, life and death situations, and discoveries that send chills down anyone's spine. Prepare yourself for moments of anxiety and thrills, because these stories aren't just fiction, but the dark truths of life. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications to join us in uncovering even more horrifying mysteries. The Alaskan wilderness sprawled across the horizon, its majestic mountains kissed by the fading light of the sun. Anchorage, a city nestled in this vast expanse, was a peculiar blend of nature and civilization, where the call of the wild brushed against the comforts of urban life. In summer, the days stretched long, painted in hues of gold and green, while the cold, biting winters offered a stark contrast that forced residents indoors. The people of Anchorage thrived in this unique climate, forging tight-knit communities bound by shared experiences and a deep-rooted love for their homeland. Yet, within this picturesque setting, shadows lurked in the corners of the city. Dark secrets lay hidden beneath the surface, veiled by the smiles of the friendly faces that populated the streets. In the heart of this community lived Robert Hansen, a man who embodied the quintessential family man, at least on the outside. Robert was a successful baker, known for his delicious pastries and warm demeanor. He operated a quaint little shop that became a favorite among locals. With flour-dusted hands and a welcoming smile, he served coffee and pastries each morning, exchanging pleasantries with customers. To his neighbors, he was a devoted husband and father, often seen playing with his children in the yard or lending a hand to those in need. But Robert's childhood was not as idyllic as the life he portrayed. Born in 1939, he grew up in a strict household that instilled fear rather than love. His father, a World War II veteran, was stern and demanding, leaving Robert with deep-seated insecurities. He often felt invisible, trapped in the shadows of his father's expectations. In his early years, Robert found solace in the woods, where he learned to hunt and track animals. These experiences planted the seeds of a darker obsession that would blossom in the years to come. As he reached adulthood, Robert's charming exterior masked a growing resentment towards women. His first marriage ended in divorce, leaving him bitter and angry. It wasn't long before he remarried, settling into a new life, yet the whispers of his past began to take root, intertwining with the threads of his daily existence. The summer of 1971 arrived with an air of promise. The streets of Anchorage buzzed with activity as residents flocked to outdoor festivals and gatherings. It was during one of these nights, with the smell of fried dough and laughter in the air, that Robert's path crossed with Tina. A young woman in her early 20s, she was full of dreams and aspirations, having moved to Anchorage to escape a troubled past. Tina stood outside a bar, her laughter mingling with the sounds of the bustling crowd. Robert, in his blue truck, noticed her immediately. There was something about her that drew him in, her carefree spirit, the way she moved, her laughter echoing in the night. He rolled down his window, flashing a warm smile. "Need a ride home?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. Tina hesitated, sensing an undercurrent in his gaze, but the allure of safety and warmth pulled her in. She slipped into the passenger seat, unaware that the night would unravel in ways she couldn't imagine. As they drove through the empty streets, Robert maintained a pleasant conversation, masking the intentions swirling in his mind. He took a few turns away from the main road, the darkness enveloping them like a shroud. Panic slowly crept into Tina's heart as she realized they were heading away from the safety of the city. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Just a little detour," he replied, his tone deceptively calm. "I know a beautiful spot where we can see the stars." Tina felt a chill creep up her spine, but before she could react, Robert revealed a gun. The serene beauty of the Alaskan wilderness transformed into a twisted arena for Robert Hansen's dark desires. He forced Tina from the car, her screams echoing in the night, but the forest swallowed her cries. "Please, let me go," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Don't worry, you'll be fine," Robert said with a chilling calmness that sent shivers down her spine. "Just trust me." In those harrowing moments, Robert felt a surge of power, exhilaration coursing through his veins as he drove the knife into the very essence of his victim. He had become the hunter, and Tina was nothing more than prey in his sick game. The moon cast an eerie glow over the landscape, illuminating the trees that towered above them like silent witnesses to the horror unfolding beneath their branches. Robert reveled in the chase, watching as Tina stumbled through the underbrush, fear coursing through her every movement. She ran, heart pounding, desperately trying to escape the grip of her tormentor. Robert, however, was relentless, a predator enjoying the thrill of the hunt. He stalked her through the trees, the adrenaline heightening his senses, the sound of her gasps igniting a dark excitement within him. After what felt like hours, he cornered her, the darkness swallowing her screams. The thrill he experienced was intoxicating, a cocktail of fear, power, and the chilling realization that he held life and death in his hands. With Tina's life extinguished, Robert returned home, the mask of normalcy slipping back into place. He embraced his wife and children, playing the role of a loving father, all while the remnants of his crime lingered in the shadows of his mind. But as the days turned into weeks, the thrill faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. News of missing women began to ripple through the community, panic growing as families searched for their loved ones. Robert watched with a mix of horror and exhilaration as the police investigation deepened, his secret threatening to unravel. Anchorage, once a safe haven, transformed into a landscape of fear. Women began to disappear, the stories merging into a collective dread that hung over the city like a storm cloud. In the quiet moments of his life, Robert felt the weight of his actions, the burden of secrecy pressing down on him. He became more cautious, weaving his way through the growing suspicion around him. The thrill of the hunt beckoned him, but the fear of getting caught haunted his every move. As summer faded into autumn, the tension in Anchorage escalated. Families gathered in homes, the air thick with worry and grief. Robert, once a respected figure, felt the cracks forming in the facade he had worked so hard to maintain. Police interviews with local sex workers and the mounting number of disappearances put pressure on law enforcement. Yet, despite the investigations, Robert moved through life with a chilling calmness, determined to maintain his charade. His bakery became a gathering spot for whispers, stories of the missing women exchanged in hushed tones. Customers entered with their heads down, avoiding eye contact, while Robert served them with a smile, the weight of their fear barely touching him. Inside, the turmoil grew, a storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. Robert's mind became a battleground as the thrill of the hunt clashed with the reality of his actions. The thrill that once invigorated him began to morph into a dangerous obsession. He felt a compulsion to hunt again, to reclaim the power he had tasted. Yet with each passing day, paranoia seeped into his thoughts. Could someone know? Was someone watching? He caught himself glancing over his shoulder, every creak of his home setting his heart racing. With the nights growing longer, the urge to hunt became overwhelming. He began to crave the thrill, the adrenaline that coursed through him with each act of violence. The memories of Tina and his other victims haunted him, yet they also ignited a fire within, a twisted motivation that drove him deeper into darkness. One chilly evening, as he closed up his bakery, Robert noticed a figure lingering outside. A young woman stood at the edge of the street, her face obscured by shadows. She glanced at him, and their eyes met for a fleeting moment. Fear coursed through him as he sensed an uncanny familiarity in her gaze. He hesitated, heart pounding, as she walked away. Robert's instincts kicked in. Was she a witness? Or perhaps the next potential victim? The question swirled in his mind, a whirlpool of anxiety and desire. As he drove home, the weight of his secrets pressed heavily on his chest. Would his facade crumble? The thrill of the hunt beckoned once more, but so did the encroaching darkness of his reality. The line between predator and prey blurred, leaving readers breathless for what would come next. The icy winds of Alaska's autumn pierced the air, carrying with them whispers of unease and despair. As the leaves turned from vibrant greens to muted browns, the residents of Anchorage became acutely aware of the growing number of missing women. The once bustling city now felt like a haunted landscape, where laughter and joy had been replaced by worry and fear. Robert Hansen moved through this world, a shadow among shadows, concealing the darkness that lay within. In his bakery, the aroma of fresh bread and pastries filled the air, yet it did little to mask the suffocating dread creeping into his heart. Every smile he offered to customers felt like a mask slipping further away, and with each passing day, the strain of his double life grew heavier. Local news reports began to amplify the fear resonating through the community. Women had gone missing, their cases piling up, creating a grim tally that haunted the city. Mothers held their daughters close, friends became vigilant, and the nightlife, once vibrant and carefree, dimmed as people hesitated to venture out. The police began holding meetings in the community, urging residents to be cautious and report any suspicious activity. In the evenings, as the bakery closed its doors, Robert would often catch snippets of conversations from worried customers discussing the disappearances. Each mention of a name felt like a knife twisting in his gut, yet he maintained his composure, nodding along, feigning concern while the adrenaline surged through his veins. One evening, after closing up, Robert overheard two women discussing the latest disappearance, a young mother who had been last seen near a bar downtown. Their words, filled with sorrow and disbelief, ignited something dark within him. The thrill of his actions surged back, mingling with the guilt that threatened to suffocate him. Robert's resolve began to fracture. The hunt, once a source of exhilarating power, became an obsession that clawed at his mind. He found himself mapping out locations in the wilderness where he could once again embrace the predator within. The vast Alaskan landscape called to him, a canvas for his twisted desires. It was on a particularly cold evening, with the first snows dusting the ground, that Robert decided to strike again. He had been watching a local bar, noting the women who frequented it, their laughter and carefree spirits a stark contrast to the darkness he harbored. Among them was a woman named Sarah, a waitress who worked late into the night. She had a vulnerability about her that drew him in, a tragic beauty that resonated with his twisted sense of power. Under the pretense of being a customer, Robert visited the bar repeatedly, learning her routines and observing her interactions. Each time he saw her smile, it fueled his resolve. He began to plot her abduction, envisioning the thrill of the chase and the sense of control it would bring him. With meticulous precision, Robert devised a plan. He would wait for a night when Sarah was closing up, the streets empty and dark. He imagined the thrill of the hunt, the rush of adrenaline, and the control he would wield over her. He envisioned her fear, the same fear that had electrified him during his first hunt. On the chosen night, he arrived early, feigning nonchalance as he sipped coffee at a nearby diner, watching the bar from a distance. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow on the pavement, illuminating Sarah as she laughed with colleagues. They shared a camaraderie that felt foreign to Robert, a life of normalcy that he could never attain. When the bar finally closed, he waited patiently, heart racing, as Sarah stepped into the chilly night. He followed her at a distance, keeping his footsteps silent, every instinct honed as he stalked his prey. Just as Sarah reached her car, Robert closed the distance, emerging from the shadows. The suddenness of his approach startled her. "Hey, can I give you a ride?" he asked, adopting the same friendly tone he had practiced. Her eyes widened with surprise and fear, but the polite nature of his request disarmed her momentarily. "I'm okay, thanks," she replied, backing away towards her car. "Come on, it's really late." "I promise I'm harmless," he insisted, flashing a smile that felt more like a grimace. In that moment, the facade slipped slightly, revealing the predator beneath. As she hesitated, Robert's patience wore thin. He lunged forward, brandishing the gun he had tucked in his waistband. The shock in Sarah's eyes turned to terror as he forced her into his vehicle. "Drive," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. As they sped away from the bar, the city lights fading into darkness, Robert felt a surge of exhilaration. The hunt had begun again, and with it came the intoxicating thrill of control. Robert drove for what felt like hours, the silence between them thick with tension. Sarah cried softly, her pleas falling on deaf ears. The thrill of the chase pulsed through him, drowning out her fear and anguish. Finally, he pulled into a remote area, far from any prying eyes. The wilderness surrounded them, its vastness offering both cover and isolation. He ordered Sarah out of the car, his heart pounding with excitement. "Please, don't do this," she begged, her voice shaking. "Just run," Robert said, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "You'll have a head start." He relished the moment, watching her flee into the darkness, her panic palpable as she stumbled through the underbrush. This time, he would take his time. He felt like a god in this realm, commanding life and death. The hunt was both exhilarating and terrifying. Robert stalked her, feeling the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He found pleasure in her fear, the primal instinct that surged within him igniting a fire he couldn't extinguish. As he closed the distance, he recalled the thrill he had experienced during his first kill. The memories flashed before him like a movie reel, the fear in his victim's eyes, the power he felt as he took their lives. This time would be different, he promised himself. He would savor every moment. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant howling of the wind. He reveled in the hunt, the chase feeding his dark desires. Every gasp and sob from Sarah heightened his excitement, a twisted symphony of fear that he could control. He finally caught up to her, but instead of ending it quickly, he decided to toy with her. "You're not very good at this, are you?" he taunted, his voice low and menacing. The fear in her eyes only intensified his thrill. He took his time, watching her scramble, drawing out the game as long as he could. Each moment stretched into eternity, and with every beat of her heart, he felt more alive. Eventually, he cornered her near a small creek, her body trembling as she realized she had nowhere to run. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting an eerie glow over the scene. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her face. Robert reveled in her despair. "Because I can," he replied, the words dripping with cruelty. In that moment, as he raised the knife, he felt an overwhelming sense of power wash over him. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for, the thrill of the hunt, the rush of life and death, the control he craved. With a swift motion, he silenced her cries. As silence enveloped the woods, Robert stood over Sarah's lifeless body, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He felt an odd sense of fulfillment, but it was quickly overshadowed by the reality of his actions. Cleaning up after the crime was a meticulous process. He had learned from his past mistakes, ensuring that nothing would lead back to him. He concealed Sarah's body deep within the forest, covering the evidence as best he could, every movement calculated to avoid detection. As he drove back to Anchorage, the thrill of the hunt lingered, but so did the weight of guilt. He was trapped in a cycle, each act of violence pushed him deeper into darkness, yet the exhilaration drew him back time and again. Back in the city, the police investigation intensified. With each missing woman, law enforcement stepped up efforts, patrolling the streets and setting up hotlines for tips. The community grew restless, women were advised to stay indoors, and fear hung in the air like a thick fog. Robert watched it all unfold with a chilling detachment. He felt the pressure closing in, the fear of exposure creeping into his thoughts. In the bakery, customers exchanged worried glances, conversations shifting towards the growing fear that had overtaken the city. As Robert served coffee and pastries, he masked his anxiety behind a friendly smile, all the while sensing the growing scrutiny around him. One afternoon, as he restocked supplies in the back of the bakery, Robert overheard two officers discussing the latest findings in the investigation. They mentioned witness accounts of a blue truck seen near the locations of the abductions, and Robert's heart raced as he realized they were narrowing in on him. He had a blue truck, an innocuous detail that felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Panic surged through him as he imagined being caught, the mask slipping away, the reality of his actions laid bare for the world to see. Determined not to let that happen, he took action. He decided to change the truck's appearance, adding layers of grime and dirt, making it less recognizable. It was a desperate measure, but the thrill of the chase had turned into a desperate game of survival. Despite the mounting pressure, Robert couldn't resist the urge to hunt again. The thrill was too powerful, the darkness too seductive. He began scouting new targets, watching women who seemed vulnerable, keeping notes on their routines and habits. As he prepared for another night of hunting, a sense of dread washed over him. The risk was higher than ever, and the walls were closing in. Each moment felt charged with tension, a dangerous game of cat and mouse that could end in disaster. One night, as he prepared to leave, he received an anonymous phone call. A voice on the other end warned him to stop what he was doing, threatening to expose him if he didn't. Robert's heart raced. It was a direct challenge to his authority, a reminder that he wasn't invincible. The finality of that moment settled in his gut. He was being hunted now, and the thrill had turned into a desperate fight for survival. He would have to make a choice, continue down the path of violence or face the consequences of his actions. As he stared into the darkness of the Alaskan night, Robert realized he was no longer the predator, he was the prey. The tension had reached a boiling point, and the hunt was about to take a dark turn. With his heart pounding, he made his choice. He would not back down, he would not be defeated. But the question loomed large: how much longer could he maintain this facade before it all came crashing down around him? As winter settled over Anchorage, a sense of dread hung heavily in the air. The snow-covered streets, usually bustling with holiday cheer, were now eerily quiet. the community's fear had morphed into paranoia. Posters of missing women plastered lampposts and storefronts, their smiling faces a haunting reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the surface. Robert Hanson's routine had become increasingly fraught with tension. Each day felt like a game of chess, and he was acutely aware that he was running out of moves. The police were tightening their grip, employing new strategies to capture the elusive predator terrorizing their city. The pressure was palpable, he could feel it like the cold wind nipping at his heels. In the bakery, customers whispered anxiously, exchanging theories about the disappearances. Robert listened, his heart pounding with each name mentioned. Would he become the next target of suspicion? He smiled at his customers, but inside, he was a simmering pot of anxiety. With the city on high alert, Robert shifted his focus. He had learned to adapt, finding new ways to blend in with the community. The thrill of the hunt was intoxicating, but now he felt the walls closing in, and he needed to act quickly before the authorities caught wind of his true nature. He began to observe a new target, a young woman named Emily, who worked at a local diner. She was sweet, approachable, and always wore a smile that lit up the room. Robert was drawn to her innocence, but he also recognized her vulnerability. As the diner bustled with activity, Robert would stop by for coffee, charming her with his friendly demeanor while secretly plotting his next move. Emily often shared stories about her dreams and aspirations, unaware of the sinister mind lurking just beneath the surface of their interactions. As the holiday season approached, Robert felt the pressure mount. He decided that Emily would be his next victim. Her routine was predictable, she often closed the diner alone late at night. Robert meticulously planned the abduction, his mind racing with excitement and fear. He purchased new supplies, duct tape, rope, and a small handgun. Each item felt like a step closer to fulfilling his dark desires. Robert felt the familiar rush as he prepared to hunt again, yet anxiety clawed at the edges of his mind. This time, the stakes were higher, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. One chilly evening, as snowflakes began to fall, Robert watched from the diner's parking lot as Emily finished her shift. He felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was teetering on the edge of a precipice, ready to leap into darkness. The moment arrived. As Emily walked towards her car, Robert stepped out of the shadows. "Hey, Emily. Need a ride?" he called out, feigning a casual tone. She looked startled but relieved to see a familiar face. "Oh, Robert. Thanks, but I can manage." Before she could walk away, he pulled out the gun, his heart racing with the thrill of power. "Get in the car," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Fear flickered in her eyes, but she complied, sensing the danger in his tone. As she slid into the passenger seat, Robert felt the adrenaline surge through him. The hunt was on. With Emily in the car, the air was thick with tension. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Just a little drive," he replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. He drove away from the diner, the snow crunching beneath the tires as he headed towards a secluded area. As they drove, Robert's mind raced with conflicting emotions. The thrill of the hunt mingled with a twinge of guilt. He had seen her laugh and share stories, he had listened to her dreams. Yet the darkness within him overpowered any fleeting sense of remorse. "Can you turn on the radio?" Emily asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. He obliged, but the music did little to ease the tension. After what felt like an eternity, Robert pulled into a wooded area, the trees standing like sentinels against the cold night sky. He parked the car and turned to Emily, who was visibly trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Because I can," he said coldly, the thrill of power surging through him once more. Before she could react, he reached for her and pulled her towards him. Her screams echoed through the trees, but the isolation of the woods swallowed them whole. As he forced her out of the car, Robert reveled in the chaos unfolding around him. He bound her wrists with duct tape, a perverse sense of satisfaction washing over him. Emily's terrified eyes pierced through him, yet he felt invincible, like a predator closing in on its prey. "Please, don't hurt me," she begged, her voice filled with desperation. "Just run," he ordered, a twisted smile forming on his lips. The thrill of the hunt coursed through his veins as he released her, watching her stumble into the darkness. The game had begun. He took pleasure in her fear, his heart racing as he prepared to chase her down once more. As Emily darted through the trees, her cries faded into the night, leaving only the sound of the wind. Robert moved stealthily, each step calculated. He relished the moment, feeling like a hunter tracking down a wild animal. He listened intently, the rustling of leaves guiding him closer to her location. The thrill of the chase ignited a fire within him, a primal urge that drowned out any remnants of guilt. Suddenly, he spotted her. Emily had tripped, falling to the ground. In that instant, the world around him faded away. He felt like a god, watching as she scrambled to her feet, desperately trying to escape. As he closed the distance between them, Robert felt exhilarated. The rush of adrenaline pulsed through him, drowning out any sense of humanity. Emily turned to face him, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, don't. I can help you," she pleaded, her voice trembling. The twisted pleasure he felt was intoxicating. He lunged at her, grabbing her by the hair and pulling her back. "You're not in control here," he snarled, the darkness enveloping him. But in that moment of sheer terror, Emily's spirit flickered. She fought back, scratching at his arms, her screams filling the night. Robert's rage boiled over, and he struck her, feeling a sick sense of satisfaction as he exerted his power. As the darkness enveloped them, Robert's mind spiraled deeper into chaos. He felt untethered, caught in a whirlwind of emotions, thrill, guilt, and anger all mixing together. But the need for control reigned supreme. In the aftermath of the struggle, he stood over Emily's limp body, the reality of his actions crashing down on him like a wave. He was a monster, and yet, the thrill of having taken her life only deepened his darkness. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to comprehend what he had done. Was he truly lost to the abyss? The darkness inside him felt insatiable, and he knew he had crossed an irrevocable line. As he hurriedly concealed her body in the snow, a sense of dread settled over him. He was acutely aware that the police were closing in, and this murder would only serve to escalate their investigation. Back in Anchorage, the police were working tirelessly, piecing together the lives of the missing women. Emily's disappearance would send shockwaves through the community, prompting a renewed sense of urgency among law enforcement. The police began interviewing friends and family, canvassing the neighborhood for clues. Robert felt the pressure mounting, and he was terrified of being discovered. He couldn't afford to slip up. As the investigation ramped up, Robert's paranoia grew. He avoided going out during the day, preferring the cover of darkness. The bakery became his sanctuary and prison, a place where he could hide from prying eyes. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Robert's anxiety reached a fever pitch. He found it increasingly difficult to focus on the mundane tasks of running his bakery. The sound of sirens in the distance made his heart race, and he constantly scanned the streets for police presence. One day, as he was closing up shop, he noticed a police car parked outside the bakery. Panic surged through him as he watched officers enter, their expressions serious. He forced a smile, his heart pounding in his chest. "Evening, Robert," one of the officers said casually. "Just checking in. How's business?" "Great, as usual," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. As they chatted, Robert felt the weight of their scrutiny. Were they onto him? Did they suspect him? He smiled and laughed at their jokes, all the while calculating his next move. The police began to establish connections between the missing women, forming a web of suspicion that inevitably pointed towards Robert. He felt the walls closing in as they gathered more evidence, and the sense of urgency mounted. Every time he turned on the news, he heard about the increased police presence in the area and their determination to find the perpetrator. As Anchorage plunged deeper into winter, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Robert Hansen felt the pressure of the investigation bearing down on him like an oppressive weight. With every siren that echoed through the streets, his pulse quickened. He was living on borrowed time, and the dread of being caught gnawed at him incessantly. Each day at the bakery was a performance, a facade that masked the turmoil brewing inside him. He had become an expert at deflection, masking his emotions behind a warm smile and engaging demeanor. But beneath the surface, a storm raged, and he was terrified that it would all come crashing down. The police were relentless in their pursuit of the truth, and their efforts began to bear fruit. They interviewed anyone who had interacted with the missing women, collecting testimonies that painted a clearer picture of the men who haunted the shadows of Anchorage. Robert could feel their eyes on him, scrutinizing his every move, and the paranoia only fueled his darker impulses. One fateful evening, while he was closing the bakery, Robert encountered a familiar face. It was Emily's sister, Sarah, a striking young woman with an intensity in her gaze that unsettled him. She had been coming to the bakery regularly, searching for answers about her sister's disappearance. "Have you seen my sister?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling but determined. "She used to come in here all the time." Robert's stomach twisted. He forced a smile, suppressing the panic that threatened to consume him. "I haven't seen her lately, but I'm sure she's fine. Sometimes people just need a break." Sarah's eyes narrowed, and Robert felt exposed under her scrutiny. "I don't believe that. I think something happened to her. I can't shake the feeling." The conversation lingered in the air long after she left. Robert's mind raced. What if she was onto him? What if her instincts led her to discover the truth? He knew he had to silence any potential threats. The thrill of his previous hunts echoed in his mind, a reminder of the power he wielded, yet the stakes had never felt higher. Haunted by his encounter with Sarah, Robert resolved to strike again. He needed to regain control over the situation, to remind himself of the power he held over life and death. After careful observation, he set his sights on another victim, a local waitress named Lisa. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and a vibrant spirit that drew people in. He began frequenting the diner where she worked, charming her with his small talk, all the while plotting her abduction. The thrill of the hunt rekindled a sense of excitement within him, distracting him from the mounting pressure of the investigation. As the nights grew longer and colder, Robert prepared himself for the chase. He collected his tools, duct tape, a knife, and a small gun. Each item represented not only his intent but also the monstrous part of him that relished in the thrill of domination. One snowy evening, as the world outside was blanketed in silence, Robert put his plan into action. He parked his truck a short distance from the diner, watching as Lisa closed up for the night. The streets were empty, and the darkened windows of the diner cast eerie shadows against the snow. When she emerged, Robert stepped from the shadows, blocking her path. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with danger. Lisa hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "No, I'm okay. I'll just call a cab." Before she could back away, he drew the gun, the cold steel glinting in the moonlight. "Get in the truck, now." The fear that washed over her was palpable, and Robert felt a rush of exhilaration. She complied, climbing into the passenger seat, her breath coming in quick bursts. He drove into the night, the thrill of the chase igniting something dark within him. Robert took her to a secluded area, a desolate stretch of road surrounded by thick woods. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he parked the truck. The shadows swallowed them whole, and the reality of what he was about to do settled over him like a shroud. "Please, don't hurt me," Lisa begged, her voice trembling as he turned to face her. "Just run," he said, his voice low and menacing. The familiar thrill surged through him as he released her, watching her stumble into the darkness. He felt invincible, the hunter poised to pounce. As she darted into the woods, Robert chased her down, savoring the rush of the hunt. The snow crunched beneath his boots, and he relished in the fear that radiated from her. As he closed in on her, Robert's thoughts became consumed with a primal instinct. He felt alive, invigorated by the adrenaline that coursed through his body. He could hear her desperate breaths, the rustle of branches as she tried to escape. "Come on, Lisa. You can't hide from me," he taunted, his voice echoing through the trees. She stumbled and fell, the sound of her body hitting the ground sending a thrill down his spine. He was almost there, the moment of triumph just within reach. As he lunged toward her, he felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. But as he grabbed her, a flicker of doubt crept in. Was he losing control? The fear in her eyes mirrored the panic that was slowly building within him. He pushed it aside. This was his moment. Robert pulled Lisa to her feet, the darkness swallowing them whole. He felt a rush of exhilaration as he prepared to assert his dominance. In that fleeting moment, a sliver of hesitation gripped him, but he quickly buried it. "Please, don't." "I'll do anything," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. The weight of her words hung in the air, but Robert was past the point of no return. He had crossed an irreversible line, and he reveled in the control he had over her life. In one swift motion, he drew his knife. The glint of the blade reflected the cold moonlight as he plunged it into her. The warmth of her blood seeped into the snow, a stark contrast against the icy ground. The thrill of the kill electrified him, but in that moment of ecstasy, a deep sense of foreboding settled in his gut. He had gone too far, and the reality of his actions crashed down like a tidal wave. In the aftermath, Robert felt both invincible and hollow. He stood over her lifeless body, a twisted sense of accomplishment mingling with an unsettling emptiness. The darkness inside him had been fed, yet it left him craving more. He hurriedly concealed her body in the snow, desperate to hide the evidence. The snowflakes fell gently, covering the scene like a shroud. But in that act of concealment, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Days turned into weeks, and the police continued their investigation into the missing women. Each time Robert opened the newspaper or turned on the news, a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. The community remained on edge, and as the investigation deepened, Robert's paranoia grew. The thrill of the hunt had morphed into a desperate need to evade capture. He felt eyes on him at every turn, the weight of his secret pressing down like a leaden cloak. One evening, as he was closing the bakery, he noticed a police car parked outside. His heart raced as he saw officers speaking to customers. Were they here for him? Did they suspect anything? He forced himself to act normal, chatting with his regulars while his mind spiraled into chaos. Later that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following him. He drove around town, looking for signs of a tail. The paranoia consumed him, twisting his mind into knots. He started to see shadows where there were none, and the thought of being caught haunted him day and night. As Robert struggled to maintain his facade, cracks began to appear in his carefully constructed life. His employees noticed his increasingly erratic behavior, and friends began to whisper about his changing demeanor. "Everything okay, Robert?" one of his employees asked, concern etched on her face. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" he snapped, the tension in his voice evident. He felt a surge of anger at the suggestion that something was wrong. But deep down, he knew the truth: he was unraveling. The darkness within him was bubbling to the surface, threatening to consume him entirely. Amidst the turmoil, Robert received a call that sent shivers down his spine. It was Sarah, Emily's sister. She had been gathering information, speaking to witnesses, and had even uncovered some connections that made Robert's heart race. "I know you were one of the last people to see Emily," she said, her voice steady but filled with a haunting intensity. "I need to know what happened to her." Robert felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He was trapped, cornered by the one person who posed the greatest threat to his secrets. "I told you, I haven't seen her." "You need to let it go," he said, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. "I won't stop until I find out the truth," she replied. As the frigid winds of winter intensified in Anchorage, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive for Robert Hansen. With each passing day, he felt the walls closing in. The investigations were becoming more fervent, and Sarah's relentless pursuit of the truth left him trembling with anxiety. Every phone call, every knock on his door, and every glance in the street made his heart race. Despite his attempts to lead a normal life, Robert was plagued by paranoia. He felt the specter of discovery looming over him like a dark cloud, and he knew it was only a matter of time before his web of lies unraveled. Days blurred into one another, and each morning he awoke with a sense of dread that gnawed at his insides. The bakery, once a comforting refuge, now felt like a prison where he was being watched by unseen eyes. In an effort to regain control, Robert returned to the woods where he had buried Lisa's body. The cold air bit at his skin as he trudged through the snow, memories of the hunt flooding his mind. The thrill of that night had been intoxicating, but now it felt like a weight pressing down on him. He needed to revisit the scene, to feel the power that had coursed through him. When he arrived at the spot, he knelt in the snow, brushing away the layers that concealed his crime. The sight of the shallow grave sent a wave of nausea crashing over him, but he pushed it down. He had to remind himself of his supremacy. This was his domain, and he was the master of life and death. Meanwhile, Sarah's efforts bore fruit. She had begun collaborating with local activists and families of other missing women, gathering evidence and building a case against Robert. They scoured through police reports and conducted their own interviews, uncovering a disturbing pattern that linked Robert to the disappearances. One evening, while perusing old records at the local library, Sarah stumbled upon a list of women who had gone missing in the Anchorage area over the years. The chilling realization struck her as she connected the dots: Robert had been present in the vicinity of many of these cases. With her heart pounding, she returned to her small apartment and began drafting a report. She detailed her findings and prepared to present her evidence to the authorities. Sarah could feel the momentum building, and she was determined to bring Robert to justice. One morning, Sarah finally gathered enough courage to approach Detective Carlson, the lead investigator on the case. She arrived at the police station with a thick folder of evidence in her hands, her heart racing as she made her way to his office. "Detective Carlson," she began, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I have crucial information about the disappearances. I believe Robert Hansen is involved." Carlson looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Go on," he urged, intrigued. Sarah laid out her findings, recounting the patterns she had noticed and the unsettling coincidences. "He was the last person seen with many of the victims," she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "We need to investigate him further." The detective listened intently, and as Sarah spoke, she could see his expression shift from skepticism to concern. "This is serious," he finally said, jotting down notes. "I'll need you to provide as much detail as possible." As the investigation took on a new urgency, Robert felt the pressure mounting. He couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on him. The tension was palpable, and the small-town whispers of Sarah's findings began to circulate, further igniting the embers of fear within him. In a desperate bid to maintain control, Robert made plans to flee. He had enough money saved to disappear for a while, and he knew that time was of the essence. But a sense of loyalty to his family and life in Anchorage held him back. That night, Robert sat in the dim light of his kitchen, contemplating his next move. The shadows danced on the walls, mimicking the chaos in his mind. He felt trapped between two worlds, the life he had built and the monstrous secret that threatened to destroy it. The tension reached its breaking point when Sarah decided to confront Robert directly. She had gathered enough evidence to substantiate her claims, and now she needed to confront the man she believed was responsible for her sister's disappearance. One snowy evening, she arrived at the bakery just as the last customers were leaving. The bell jingled above the door, and Robert looked up, his stomach dropping. "Can we talk?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but laced with determination. "What about?" Robert replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "About Emily," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I know you know something." Robert's heart raced, but he maintained his composure. "I told you, I haven't seen her." "You need to let this go," he insisted. "No, I won't," Sarah replied, her voice rising slightly. "I've done my research, Robert. You were the last person to see so many women. I know you're involved." The atmosphere in the bakery shifted, a tense silence enveloping them. Robert's facade began to crack as fear coursed through him. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat, his voice low and threatening. Sarah pressed on, undeterred. "I have proof. I'm going to the police, and I'll make sure they investigate you thoroughly. You can't hide forever." The fear in Robert's eyes transformed into a cold rage. He felt cornered, like a rat trapped in a cage. "You think you can just come in here and threaten me? You don't know who you're dealing with," he growled, the predator revealing itself. As the confrontation escalated, Robert's temper flared. He moved closer to Sarah, invading her personal space in an attempt to intimidate her. "You should be careful. People have a way of disappearing," he hissed, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Sarah's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "I won't back down. I'm going to expose you, Robert. You can't scare me." In that moment, Robert realized he had underestimated her. She was not just a victim's sister, she was a force to be reckoned with. The thrill of the hunt that once filled him with excitement now turned into desperation. He had to act quickly before she took the steps to bring him down. Determined to silence Sarah, Robert made a rash decision. He decided to confront her again, this time with a more sinister intent. He planned to lure her away, far from prying eyes and the safety of the police station. Under the guise of wanting to talk further, he invited her to meet him at a secluded location, an old cabin he had used as a hunting lodge. He played the part of the concerned man, hoping to throw her off guard. "I just want to help you find answers," he told her, his voice dripping with false sincerity. When Sarah hesitated, Robert pressed. "You can't just walk into this alone. Let's figure this out together." Despite her instincts screaming at her to walk away, Sarah felt compelled to confront Robert once and for all. She agreed to meet him at the cabin, fully aware of the danger but resolute in her mission. On the day of the meeting, the skies hung heavy with clouds, and a light snow began to fall as Sarah drove to the cabin. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a palpable sense of dread settling in her stomach. She parked her car a distance away, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves before stepping into the unknown. The cabin loomed ahead, dark and foreboding amidst the snow-covered trees. As she approached, a sense of unease washed over her, but she pushed it aside. This was her chance to confront the men who had haunted her dreams. Inside, Robert was waiting. The dim light of the cabin cast shadows on the walls, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere that felt suffocating. He greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, his demeanor eerily calm. "Thanks for coming, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth. "I really do want to help you." "Help me." "Or help yourself," she replied, crossing her arms defiantly. As they talked, the conversation turned tense. Sarah could sense that Robert was hiding something, and she was determined to uncover the truth. "I know what you've done, Robert. You can't hide behind your charm anymore," she challenged. His facade began to crack, and anger flared in his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sarah. You don't know what you're getting into," he warned, his voice low and menacing. But Sarah was undeterred. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done." In a moment of desperation, Robert lunged toward her, his intentions clear. Sarah dodged just in time, her heart racing as she realized how precarious her situation had become. The cabin became a battleground, a struggle for power and control. Sarah fought back with every ounce of strength she had, but Robert's fury was overwhelming. He was a man driven by desperation and a primal instinct to eliminate the threat she posed. In the chaos, they grappled for dominance. Sarah's mind raced as she searched for an escape. She remembered the small window in the back of the cabin, the only way out. With a surge of adrenaline, she broke free from Robert's grasp and sprinted toward the window, her heart pounding in her chest. Just as she reached it, Robert's hands gripped her ankle, pulling her back. With sheer determination, Sarah kicked free, scrambling out of the window and landing hard in the snow. The coldness bit into her skin, but she couldn't stop now. She heard Robert's furious shouts behind her as she fled into the trees. She ran blindly, her breath coming in ragged gasps, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The woods were a labyrinth, but she forced herself to stay focused. She had to escape. Behind her, she could hear Robert crashing through the underbrush, his footsteps closing in. The thrill of the chase fueled her determination to survive. As she sprinted deeper into the woods, Sarah's mind raced with options. She needed help. Reaching for her phone, she dialed 911, praying they would answer quickly. "Help. I'm being chased. Robert Hansen is trying to kill me," she gasped, her voice frantic. "Stay on the line. We're dispatching units to your location," the operator replied, trying to keep her calm. With the phone pressed to her ear, Sarah pushed through the trees, her heart pounding with fear. She could hear Robert's shouts growing fainter, but she couldn't let her guard down. She had to keep moving. Minutes felt like hours as she navigated the thick underbrush, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Finally, she stumbled into a clearing and saw headlights approaching in the distance. Relief washed over her as she realized help was near. "Over here," she screamed, waving her arms frantically. The squad car screeched to a halt, and 2 officers jumped out, weapons drawn. "Where is he?" one officer shouted, scanning the area. "He's back there. He's trying to kill me," Sarah cried, pointing toward the direction she had come from. The officers wasted no time, sprinting into the woods. As Sarah stood there, shivering and breathless, she felt a glimmer of hope. She had fought against the monster, and now justice was on its way. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned, and they had Robert in custody. He was handcuffed, his face twisted in rage as he glared at Sarah. "Do you really think this will end well for you?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. Sarah stood her ground, unwavering. "You'll pay for what you've done, Robert. This is just the beginning." With Robert in custody, the investigation gained momentum. Evidence was collected, and the web of crimes he had woven began to unravel. As the trial approached, Sarah's resolve only grew stronger. She attended every hearing, determined to see Robert brought to justice. The courtroom was tense, and the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses came forward, victims' families shared their heart-wrenching stories, and Sarah testified, her voice steady and unwavering as she recounted the night of terror. Each moment felt like a victory against the darkness that had plagued her family. The prosecution presented a compelling case, weaving together the evidence of Robert's crimes. The jury listened intently, their expressions growing grave as the reality of his actions sunk in. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. Sarah sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding with anticipation. When the verdict was finally read, a wave of relief washed over her, guilty on all counts. Robert Hansen would face the consequences of his horrific actions. As he was led away, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but the scars would remain. The journey had taken a toll on her, but she had emerged stronger, a beacon of hope for others who had suffered at the hands of monsters like Robert. In the aftermath of the trial, Sarah found solace in the support of her community. She became an advocate for victims' rights, using her story to raise awareness about the dangers lurking in the shadows. While the wounds of the past would never fully heal, she forged a path toward healing and hope. Sarah knew she could not change what had happened, but she could help others find their voice and fight back against the darkness. As she stood before a gathering of supporters, sharing her story, she felt a sense of purpose. The battle against evil would continue, but she was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, and her voice would echo in the hearts of those who had suffered in silence. Years later, the memory of Robert Hansen lingered in the shadows of Anchorage. But Sarah had reclaimed her life. She found strength in the love of her family and friends, and the community that had rallied behind her. Though the scars of her experience remained, they served as a reminder of her resilience. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, ready to light the way for others. In the end, justice was not just about punishment, it was about healing, hope, and the unwavering belief that the truth would always prevail. Sarah had become a warrior against the shadows, a champion for those who needed a voice in a world that often turned a blind eye.